It's really too bad that I was telling somebody it's kind of not fair that somebody sings that well in the morning, right? Like maybe you do in the shower, but maybe that's it. Welcome, everybody. My name is Chris Kimpston. I am the men's minister here. Special welcome to you if you are checking it out this week for the first time. I am so excited to be with you. We're talking about the Pyramid of Success. It's this book by John Wooden, a very successful basketball coach from back in the day a few decades ago. But the reason we're talking about him has nothing to do with how good he was at basketball, but instead the fact that he turned boys into men by the way that he loved them well. And we're going to talk about actually some examples of that. I know we've been saying that a lot, but we're actually giving some examples today. And this book is available in the bookstore or wherever books are sold. So feel free to grab your copy of that if you need some reading over the holiday week. Today, we are talking about a couple of really great building blocks is what they've been calling them, but really there are these different concepts that make up kind of this whole pyramid. And the first one that we're talking about today is adaptability. Adaptability, which Coach Wooden defines as being able to adjust to any situation at any given time. Coach says that while indeed we can count on death and taxes, that's the old phrase, right? Like the two things you can count on in this life are death and taxes. The other thing that you can always count on, no matter what, is change. Things will always change. And the funny thing is that if we think that we don't have to worry about change. We made the world's best plan. That doesn't quite matter because guess what? Things are still going to change. So even if you have the world's best plan, you have everything laid out in front of you, you have everything that you think you have the perfect strategy laid out in front of you, and because of the amount of time, talent, and treasure that you've invested in your plans, if you can't handle change, all of that work actually doesn't matter. Adaptability is key. Some way that that's looked in my life is that I went to seminary up in the Twin Cities at Bethel Seminary. It's a seminary that a lot of folks around here went in St. Paul, Minnesota. I was the token Lutheran at a primarily Baptist seminary, and I was part of a church plant up there that met in a comedy club, and it was a really, really great place. I loved it a lot. My wife and I had just gotten married. We met at Drake, but she's from the Twin Cities. Anybody know? If you know a Minnesotan, you know that Minnesotans love Minnesota. They have to get back. So we went back to Minnesota. That's where I was going to school. We were going to live there forever because it's a really great place. I love the Twin Cities. Listen to how settled we were. I had a dog, 2 dogs, a rabbit, a wife, and a house. Can you get more settled than that? I don't think you can. So out of the blue, during my last year of seminary, I get a call, and it's Mr. John Annenson on the other end of that. I had led worship for John when I was a student at Drake. He said, hey, would you be interested in going to this and interviewing for this role at Hope? And I said, thanks, but no thanks. I'm doing good. I'm in the Twin Cities and not trying to go back to West Des Moines, or not trying to go back to the Des Moines area. 2 dogs, rabbit, wife, house, doing good. And then he said the only thing that could have ever gotten me back, which was, hey, I was also working at World Vision at the time, trying to convince people they could run marathons to raise money for Clean Water for Africa. So young adult church plant and a missions job at World Vision. He said the job that I'm talking about is doing young adult ministry downtown and directing our missions partnerships. And I said, so 2 months later, we had sold our house. We had said yes. We were moving back down to Des Moines, and that was several years ago, and a circuitous route that I find myself before you gentlemen today. Point being, I said no. I wasn't interested. That's not actually what I was meant to do. Even if we have the world's best plans, our inability to adapt will be our downfall. Coach puts it much more eloquently in this way. Coach says, there it is, we change what we can, but if we become too concerned, involved and engrossed in circumstances over which we have no control or can't change, get this, those circumstances are going to have a negative impact on events and outcomes we can change. So many of us, and I'm really just talking to me, thanks for coming to my therapy session, is you have something in your life that you know you can't change. And so what you end up doing is spending all your time and energy on this thing that was never going to change in the first place, when really what that's doing is taking your time and your energy away from the stuff you actually got control over. That's why adaptability is so important. 1 Corinthians 9:22 says it this way. Paul states that the writer Paul is talking to the church in Corinth, and he's explaining why he is different in some circumstances than in other circumstances. They're like, Paul, you go to all these different places. How did this go? Paul says, he becomes weak amidst the weak in order that he might befriend the weak. Now, what he is not saying, Paul is not trying to say that he's tricking somebody. He's not deceiving somebody. He's not trying to make the sale. He's not being a salesman to them. Quite to the contrary, what Paul is talking about is being able to contextualize. Sometimes, and sometimes this proliferates in men's ministry, not this one, but other ones as well. Sometimes we have this idea that being bold for Christ means that we tell people when they're wrong, that we don't or we shouldn't lead with any amount of grace or kindness, because guess what? That's what it means to be unashamed, right? When instead, somebody that takes a tough guy strategy towards their faith and other people's faith, what that's actually is just you trying to prove to yourself that you're a real Christian or whatever that is, instead of leading with love that Jesus did. You know, who contextualized his approach in his ministry was Jesus. An example, to bring it down to earth maybe, is that if you have someone who's brand new to Men of Hope, and he's gone through some church hurt before, he's like, listen, I haven't been to church, this bad thing happened to somebody that I know. Well, that happens a lot at Hope. People will come back and they say, I'm willing to give this big place a try because I had a really bad experience though, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to step into it. If you hit that person right when they walk in the doors with the law of the gospel, telling them the ways that they should change their life, turn or burn, baby, that's not kind, nor is it particularly effective. Instead, that's why we have things like the goals that we talked about with sharing community in something like the chili cook-off and the darts tournament, right? Doing wings and things is another great opportunity for people to get connected with men. I was having meetings this last week about the potential of having a Revive table here in the morning with a group of Revive guys. It's all about, and a lot of those folks are coming to Hope from other churches, from a place where they were hurt by church before. The point being, we can contextualize what we're doing. Now, if you instead find that you're connecting with a new guy, and they're just new to Men of Hope, they've never been here on Wednesday, but they've been walking with the Lord there for a large portion of their life, they might be ready for a healthy amount of challenge. But the important thing is the only way that you would know that is through relationship. And the only way that you're successful is adaptability. The ability to read the situation in front of you. That's true in ministry, but that's also true in life. Contextualization in this way is not meekness or weakness, but it's a sign of intelligence and leadership. Another way to say that is we should meet people where they are. Why? Because that's what Jesus did. So that is adaptability. And these three are really connected today. So the second one here is honesty. Coach Wooden calls it doing the things that we know are right and not giving into the temptations to do the things that we know are wrong. And in this case, what Coach is talking about isn't just in the words that we speak. Sometimes we think of honesty just as like the is what he said true, the truth check. The better question is, and the one that Coach is speaking to here, are you being honest in your thought and in your action Are you living honestly to the person that you are made to be, to the man that God made you to be? He talks about the inverse is that a dishonest act is an attempt to deceive one. Get this. Often the people that we're trying to deceive is ourselves, right? The person that we're often trying to deceive is ourselves. Now, he does note that dishonesty, the repercussions of when we're not honest with our thoughts, with our actions, the way that we're behaving in our relationships, whatever that looks like, dishonesty, no matter the reason, it destroys our credibility, it ruins our reputation, and it costs us our self-respect. Maybe you think one of those is true, but all three of those exist whenever we don't live honestly in who we are. Coach talks about some times when, gasp, he wasn't honest. We're never trying to paint John Wooden as some sort of saint, right? And he talks a couple of times in which he was not particularly honest. One of these times was, and this is hard to imagine because like replay catches everything, right? Like you can see every angle of every minute of every game. But get this, something that happened in basketball back in the day is that if you got fouled, the free throw shooter is supposed to, or the guy that gets fouled is supposed to shoot the free throw, right? But this other coach that they were playing at the time kept sending a better free throw shooter to the line, and apparently just like nobody was paying attention. I know, this is like basketball back in the day, apparently. But coach was like, wait a second, we're just doing that now? He knew that was wrong. He knew that was like just blatantly cheating the actual rules of the game. But coach decided to try doing that too because, listen, they're not allowed to send a better free throw shooter to the line. They're doing it. I guess I will too. But because Coach Wooden is Coach Wooden, he's a little bit more famous, more eyes were on him, he got caught for it, got in trouble. He talks about how he still has a lot of shame for that event because that's not who I am. That's not who I'm supposed to be. I wasn't living honestly into who I was in the way that I was coaching. Now, the important thing that I want us to hear is honesty is not just like, hey, are you following the rules or not? Because Coach talks about in this, Coach talks about another circumstance, it's against the rules. It might actually still be against the rules, I'm not sure. But, there's a lot of rules around what compensation players are or are not able to receive in college. I'm not here to have that debate. But point being is that there was a player that ended up in jail, one of Wooden's guys. And so Coach Wooden went and bailed him out. It was against the law to bail a player out of jail. And Coach said, I never tried to hide what I did and would still do it today. Coach said, who I am bailed that man out of jail. I knew that he wouldn't be safe in there. I went in there, I got him out. I did that with his own funds. He wasn't embezzling anything. He's just like, it was against the rule for me as his college coach to go bail him out of jail. I never hit it. I knew it was against the rules, but I'd do it again. In that case, John Wooden is living, even though he broke the rules, he's still living honestly with who he is, the calling on his life, with integrity in who he is supposed to be. Honesty is not just about lying, and it's not just about the rules. It's about living with integrity in all that you do and say. The book of James puts it this way: it's a sin to know what you ought to do and to not do it, right? It's not just about not being deceptive or not lying. It's dishonest to know the right thing and to not do it according to Scripture. It's about living with integrity in all that you do. So we have honesty, right? We have adaptability. Next we have resourcefulness. This is just training my hand strength. It's going to be good. So, resourcefulness, as defined by Coach, is using our wits, our proper judgment, and our common sense to solve problems and meet challenges. Wooden acknowledges that the modern term for this, and this is funny because this book came out a little while ago. This is still true. The modern term for resourcefulness is entrepreneurial spirit. right? You know those guys that just like can find a way to do anything, MacGyver back in the day, right? Like that's the type of thing that we're talking about. He said, Coach Wooden says, do you call it an entrepreneurial spirit? I call it resourcefulness. And the problem with the phrase entrepreneurial spirit is that some of you know entrepreneurs, and you look at them and you're like, that is not me. We are not talking about a profession. We're not talking about how you make money. I'm not saying you have to start a business in order to be holy. I'm saying that the spirit in which you can figure things out and adapt to change, we're talking about adaptability and honesty. If you're able to follow that call in your life, being honest to who you are, being able to roll with the punches for change, but also to figure it out when things don't go your way, this is the next step, resourcefulness. What Coach is talking about is not just starting a business, it's talking about the ability to think outside the box, be discerning enough to do what needs to be done to accomplish your goals and the callings that God's put on your life. The inverse of this, it is not enough, friends, and we've all done this at different points in our lives when we don't rise to the occasion, when we don't rise to the challenge, right? But it's not enough to say, well, I had the ambition to do the right, listen, I thought it was going to go well, but listen, things just didn't fall right into place, right? Guess it wasn't meant to be. Guess the circumstances weren't right. And I'm not saying that you should double down on everything in your life, but we all know things that we maybe have leaned into comfort too much and said, well, I guess it just wasn't meant to be. Everyone who has accomplished something great was invited into personal growth by having to adapt. In turn, that gave them additional skills and made them who they're made to be. Coach talks in the book about how, and this is insane thinking about Coach Wooden doing this, early in his career, I think it was at a different school, to raise money for a basketball team that wasn't being profitable, he needed to go. He went on the train and sold sandwiches. He made pins and sold them mostly to band members, he said, in the student body. He did what he needed to do to make sure his guys had the opportunity that they needed to do. He could have stepped back and said, listen, I guess it's not on me. It was on them to step up. But instead, he said, you know what? How can I figure this out? What skills, what abilities, what circumstances has God put in my life so that I can step forward and step up? You are going to face challenges in this broken world as you pursue holy callings. This world is broken, and we are called by a whole and holy God. So naturally in there, you are going to meet challenges. The question is how you're going to deal with those challenges. The question is how we will handle when things don't go our way. How might you be missing who God is trying to make you, and simply because you're unwilling to try something new or to shift? How might you be missing what God is indeed trying to lead you into? How might you adjust your plan and all of a sudden step into new blessing? This could sound a lot like self-help, right? But Luke 11:9 says, those who knock at the door will be answered. Keep on looking and you will find. This is not the law of attraction. I'm not saying think it into existence. No. What I am saying is that if we keep pursuing what we believe God is leading us towards, you might not find what you were looking for originally. You're like, I am going to sing as well as Jacob Herr. It might not be in the cards for you. And chances are, actually, I'm willing to bet it's not. Nobody sings as well as that guy. But point being, you could try to pursue something with your whole heart, and all of a sudden, if you keep pursuing it, you might not get what you were looking for in the way that you were looking for it, but because we worship the God that knows us, the infinite God of the universe, we're going to receive what we need. Maybe not what we want, but definitely what we need. Maybe you thought what you needed was a specific job or a promotion. You're like, listen, what I feel called towards, being the boss. I do it better than the guys who are my bosses now. I'm going to step forward, and you know what? This is who I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to get that job. I'm supposed to get that promotion. I'm supposed to make that amount of money. But instead, you keep at it, I guess, and you take the opportunity to adapt. You're being resourceful. Let's say what ends up happening is that maybe as you not just try to climb the ladder, but you have integrity with who God made you to be as you pursue those goals. And all of a sudden, you find yourself in community with people at your work. You find some coworkers that you're friends with, or you're going to work on yourself, and all of a sudden you show up at Men of Hope, or you show up in a church small group, or however that looks for you. You actually get to know your neighbors. Gasp. And all of a sudden you find yourself in honest-to-goodness relationships with people. You have actual honest-to-goodness friends, and it's weird, because even though you didn't get the promotion, because you had integrity and you were honest with who God led you to be, all of a sudden, those relationships that you have in your life, with maybe a spouse, maybe with a friend, maybe with a small group, all of a sudden, you feel more validated in the way that you were looking for that job to validate you. This isn't the law of attraction. It was the fact that you walked in in the shoes of the man that God made you to be, and then all of a sudden you received that validation you were looking for in the wrong place. You realize that what you were looking for was that validation and that God gave it to you. Now, maybe on the other side, you're like, nah, it's not really the work thing for me. I just wish I had that relationship, right? Like, guys that hey, they constantly have somebody pouring into them, and they have that spouse that you're like, man, why can't that be my life? That marriage, that significant other, you said, then I'll be happy if I get that thing, right? But let's say you keep pursuing that into a string of broken relationships, and you admit maybe you're not quite mature enough to handle all of that, but all of a sudden you find yourself once again at the end of a heartbreak, and you just think it's never going to work for me. So instead, what happens is you live with integrity, you're honest with yourself, and you say, you know what, I'm going to invest in who God made me to be. You say, I'm going to step forward. You work on yourself. You decide. You invest in your interests, in your hobbies. You find a mentor. Maybe you actually go to therapy. And in doing so, you're actually become the person that God made you to be. And you find that significant other when you're not looking. This has happened to a lot of people. That all of a sudden, that thing that you were pursuing, that you needed to be happy, all of a sudden, when you invest in your relationship with God, you invest in who you were made to be, all of a sudden that person comes along because you're actually ready to be the person who she made you to be. This is resourcefulness. And how it is because while it might not look the way that you meant for it to be, we continue to walk with God, seeing the opportunities that are in front of us and pursuing where we think God is leading. And because it's an act of faith, trusting that what we truly need is there on the other side, because God will never leave us nor forsake us. It might not have looked like you thought in that situation that I shared. It was a lot harder, but it made you into who she needs you to be. And now you're actually capable of what God called you to. So adaptability, honesty, and resourcefulness. Together, they paint a picture of living in a certain way that leads us to continue to move through the world without being knocked off course when life throws you a curveball. Leads you to be a person who is actually and radically honest, both with other people and with yourself, and that's sometimes the hardest one. This is what I'm actually struggling with. This is actually how I feel about that circumstance, and owning that. And doing what needs to be done so that you can be the man that God made you to be. I don't know about you, but that kind of thing sounds like what I'm after. And those are the opportunities that we can take with us. So, heaven forbid, and you're like, yeah, Chris did an okay job on Wednesday morning. I want this to be something that we actually have steps towards. And so in our breakout groups, discussion questions are these. Spend no time on any of them, but I would suggest you feel free to get stuck on one if something resonates with you. But also feel free to take a picture of this, write them down, and think about this in the long weekend. Because I think that these questions, my hope is that it leads us into a greater awareness of ourselves and where God might be leading. First one is, when is a time that you had to deal with change? And if, again, remember, honesty is one of these. How did it go? Did you fight it tooth and nail? Or were you actually able to roll with the punches a little bit? And regardless of how it went, what did you learn as a product of of how that went? Number two, who is someone in your life that lives or lived honestly? Maybe it's somebody who's passed and no longer with us. A lot of times when we talk about honesty, men's ministry has this weird thing that happens where it's like, turn to your neighbor and tell them your deepest, darkest sin. No, like, my question for this is, who is somebody that you know that modeled this for you? Maybe it's somebody who's still with us. Maybe it's somebody in your group. Call it out. Take the risk. Give the compliment. But what does that look like in their life? And how might it look different in yours? But who is that person that models that for you? If the answer is no one, it should be telling in the types of relationships that you should invest in. 3, what is an area in your life that you've been forced to adapt, to change things up, that it might look a little bit different than you thought, to try something new? Maybe you're in the middle of that right now. If I say that, maybe you think, hey, 10 years ago this thing happened, and this is what came out of it. Great. Maybe you're in the middle of that right now. Chances are it's both, right? But what is something good, if I'm presumptuous enough to ask, and if you have enough space from it? Feel free to share in your groups. Maybe some guy is actually going through it right now, but how you went through it back then is going to instruct for him some different things he should look for. What is something good that God is bringing out of the circumstance that you've been forced to adapt? Make sense? Are you alive? Okay, cool. Just making sure. It's like, Andy, I killed them all. Okay, let's pray together. Lord Jesus, we thank you for being a God that's always there for us, God. And God, we don't have to follow some long laundry list of rules, God. You built into each and every one of our hearts the ability to be honest with ourselves and others. You gave us skills and talents and abilities to adapt when things don't go our way, God. And you use our strengths and our passions, God, our talents and our abilities and our interests, God. You use those in our lives so that we can then roll with the changes, and radically so we can bless other people. God, thank you for that. Help us and give us eyes to see that, especially in this week when maybe some of us are going to places where, classic Thanksgiving conversations and things can get stressful with travel and family, God, if that's us. So God, be with all of us as we do that. Help us to model these things, God, and be the person you made us to be. God, be with each and every guy who this is the Thanksgiving that looks different. The holidays starting are the hardest time in the world for some folks. It's not just the happiest time of the year. So God, I just pray that you would be the comforter and friend for any way, whether it's being in a completely different place than you've been before, being alone, maybe it is, Lord, there's somebody just missing at the table that used to be there. God, help all these men know just how much you love them, that you're always with them. Help us love people the way you love us. It's in your good name, Jesus, that we pray. Amen. All right, grace and peace, friends. Go be good to each other. Have a great Thanksgiving.